Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day of the CARES Act conference. We've made it to Friday. We hope you've been enjoying all the content and this time spending together. And this morning, we have a presentation for you on duplication of benefits. My name's Jennifer Alpha. I am a senior consultant with TDA Consulting, and I'm joined by Stan. Stan, would you like to say hello?
Hello, I'm Stan Fitterman with SFF Consulting Group.
Great, thanks, Dan. So we're going to go through we have a lot of content to cover today. So we're going to go through some housekeeping, which y'all have probably seen many times. But we're going to just cover those basics for anybody who might be joining the conference late. So we're going to be doing the housekeeping followed by a duplication of benefits overview, and then the basic DOB calculations and analysis. And then we'll talk about policies and procedures and loans and wrap up with a Q&A. Now, we may be a little tight on Q&A time because we have a lot of slides in this session. If we can't get to your question for some reason, use the Ask a Question feature on the HUD Exchange, and we'll talk more about that throughout this presentation, I'm sure. But the Ask a Question is a great resource for any questions that might come up. There is a CDBG-CV pool specifically for CV funds. So definitely use that resource. Okay, so all of the PowerPoint presentations and webinars will be available on the HUD Exchange probably in about 2 weeks or so. So look for them there if you need to recap anything you learned this week or anything you missed. Participants are in listen-only mode during this session, so we won't hear any of your background noise. Closed captions can be viewed using the Show Captions feature just below the video player. And you can consult the attendee guide for more information. If you haven't received that for some reason, it went to your spam or something, you can get it in the available resources page of the event website. And as I mentioned, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but you are free to submit questions throughout the presentation. So feel free just to send those questions on in. When we get to the end, we will take as many questions as we can before 10 o'clock Eastern time. To use the Q&A feature, you want to go to the Q&A tab on your in your event site screen, and then submit questions there. For any technical issues you might be having, you want to request assistance through the chat box on the right side of the screen. Any additional questions can be emailed to eventsupport@sitemgroup.com. And finally, we're going to have some polls today just to get us all awake and interactive. You want to answer your poll questions using the polls tab, and that is on the tabbed feature there in your browser. Go to the polls tab, you can participate in those polls. Now for both the Q&A and the polls, you may need to scroll down on your screen, and that will require you to kind of push the video to the top, and so you may not see the video anymore. So just scroll on down. The Q&A and polls features are at the bottom. If you want to still be able to see the video while you're looking at the Q&A and polls, you can use the Slido app. You go to Slido in your browser. It's sli.do in your browser, and then you can type in the code for this session, which is 000111. Nice and easy. I think that is also in the chat. So if you need to access that code, it is in the chat. If you use the Slido app, you'll be able to keep your video up, see the presentation, and then just use a separate browser, or your phone or your tablet to look at Slido. Okay, and with that, we are going to launch our first poll. We would like to get a sense of who's here with us today, what your experience level is. So what is your experience with duplication of benefits? Would you say you're a pro? You've successfully balanced multiple funding sources for the same project so often that the circus is trying to recruit you for a tightrope acts? Or would you say that you've managed multiple funding sources for the same project, but it makes you nervous every time? You're just not sure you're doing it quite right. Or C, you've heard of DOB, but it just seems too intimidating to get started. And D, DOB, what's that? more alphabet soup. So what does it even mean? So let us know in the poll what your experience level is. Got a neck and neck here for B and C. Okay. Looks like most folks are in the B range, but it's very tight with C. So we kind of have a mixed group of folks who've done it a lot, but it still makes them a little nervous. And then folks who have heard of it, but they're kind of scared to get started because they're not really sure about the requirements. So it looks like that's about where most folks are landing. But we do have a good amount of folks who don't know anything about DOB. And so we're going to try to keep an even pace here to keep everybody on track. But if for some reason we're going a little fast, like I said, this video will be available on the HUD Exchange for you to review again in the future. And thanks to the pros for joining us. We're glad you're here. All right, so I'm gonna go back to the screen share. Okay, duplication of benefits. If you participated in the sessions this week, you would have heard duplication of benefits or the term DOB referenced or talked about many times. I know in the sessions that I participated in, I think it's come up in basically every session. So this is a really critical part of managing your CDBG-CV program. Today, we're going to dive a little deeper into the background for a DOB and review the basic principles. We'll walk through a few examples to ensure that you really grasp the concepts, because this is a very important topic. So you're going to learn about duplication of benefits and how to adhere to the requirements for your CV grant. So what is duplication of benefits? Duplication of benefits occurs when a person, household, business, government, or other entity receives federal assistance from multiple sources for the same purpose, so for the same cost. And the total assistance received for that purpose is more than what's needed. So basically think of this as paying for the same cost twice. We don't want to do that. That's a duplication of benefits. So quite simply, a DOB occurs when there's assistance from multiple sources for the same activity, and the total assistance is greater than the need. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about DOB. And we're going to talk about what isn't DOB, because that's just as important, right? To understand, we know what it is, but what isn't it? This is where I think it helps clarify a little bit, kind of wrap your head around what DOB is about. So we know DOB is paying for the same thing twice, so giving money for assistance to cover something that's already being paid for, so those funds aren't actually needed. But there is not a duplication of benefits when the funds are used for a different purpose. So if someone is coming to ask for funds to enhance their protective barriers at their restaurants, or to increase outside seating, that's one purpose. If they come and then also ask for money for helping to pay salaries, that's a different purpose. So if they're getting money for both of those purposes, those are different purposes, and that's not a duplication. So different purposes, not a duplication. It's also not a duplication when it is for the same purpose, but a different allowable use. So if you have, it's the same purpose, but there are different allowable uses, that's not going to be a duplication of benefits either. Oops, sorry. It's also not a duplication of benefits if it's not available to the applicant. So if the applicant isn't eligible for a certain pot of funds, just because those funds are out there in existence, it's not a duplication of a benefit. Private loans are not considered a duplication of benefits. So if a applicant has received a private loan, that's not going to be included in the analysis for whether they have received funds that might duplicate the benefit that you're trying to provide. And then also, an asset or line of credit is not a duplication of benefit. So these are all things that are not duplications of benefits, and we are going to talk about these as we go through the presentation and as we go through our examples. But what about cash and assistance for general purposes? So the treatment of cash or assistance that is general and not for a particular purpose is something where you're really going to want to look at the cost principles, and we're going to talk about cost principles later on in this presentation. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But the basic rule is sort of to look at this from the perspective of a prudent person to see if the person really needs the funds. And an example of general assistance. So say general assistance might be a church is giving a person $100 as general assistance because they're suffering from COVID. That kind of general assistance isn't going to be a duplication of benefits if, say, they're coming in to request help with their rent payments. So some of these things get a little bit nuanced, but we're going to be talking about those details as we move through here. And so we have poll number
Jennifer,
2.
if I could add for a second, as we have a question that same purpose for a different time period is also not a duplication of benefits. So if someone paid rent for one source paid for October, November, December, you could use CDBG-CV for January, February, March, and it not be a duplication of benefits.
Right, exactly. And that's a really good point, because the duplication of benefits has been huge in the provision of rental assistance, and the rental assistance has been one of those things that a lot of people have built into their programs. So understanding those rules are really important. There's a lot of guidance out there on that as well. So let's go ahead and launch the poll. This is our second poll. And in this poll, we're asking which of the following is a duplication of benefits? Is it A, CDBG-CV funds are used for a different purpose than another source? B, CDBG funds are used for the same purpose, but a different allowable use, such as rent for different months, like Stan was just describing. Or C, the total funds from all sources, including CDBG-CV, is greater than the applicant's need. D, a private loan is used for the same purpose as the CDBG-CV funds. Or E, an asset or line of credit is available for the same purpose. So which of these would be a duplication of benefits? Give folks a second here to answer. You can go ahead and show the answers. All right. Wow. You guys are listening. I like it. I like it. All right. So looking at the responses here, I can see that most folks got this right. The answer is C. The total funds from all sources, including CDBG, is greater than the applicant's need. So we're going to be going through the basic calculations here a bit in a few slides. So we're going to show you what it looks like to assess the need for the funds. As we mentioned on the previous slides, A, B, D, and E are not considered duplication of benefits. All right. So I can share my screen again. Okay. All right. All right, so we're going to review the background source materials for duplication of benefits so that you understand where these requirements come from, and also where you can read more to better understand duplication of benefits and how it works in practice. So we're going to talk about the Stafford Act and also other laws, for example, the CARES Act requirements specifically. And we're going to mention grant agreements and talk about the OMB cost principles, which play a big role in duplication of benefits as well. Now we've included the CDBG-DR register notice here because DR does require a duplication of benefits analysis, but note that this register is for disaster recovery only, and Stan's going to talk more about that in a moment. But it may help you to know that there are a lot of resources out there around duplication of benefits that have been used in the disaster recovery realm, and some of those are helpful, but we're going to point out where you need to be careful that some of the concepts don't apply to CV. All right. So we're going to talk first about the Stafford Act. The Stafford Act is the primary source of the duplication of benefits requirement. And the Stafford Act is section 312A. And I'm just going to read the requirement for you here because it's important. But it requires that the federal agencies assure that no person, business concern, or other entity will receive assistance with respect to any loss as to which he has received financial assistance under another program. So again, receiving assistance for the same purpose, same cost twice. Now this requirement is imposed on the federal government. You can see there in the text, it requires that federal agencies assure that there's no duplication of benefits. But the federal government is going to pass this requirement along to its grantees. That's how it works with most of these federal requirements, right? They're looking to you to make sure that when you receive the funds, you're not going to allow any sort of duplication of benefit. And so that's why it's really important that you have good policies and procedures in place, and we'll talk about those a little later on as well. There is a link to the Stafford Act there at the bottom of the screen too, if you want to go ahead and read that. So now we'll talk about specifically the requirement under CDBG-CV. So the CARES Act provides that the Secretary of HUD shall ensure there are adequate procedures in place to prevent the duplication of benefits as required under the Stafford Act and the amendments in the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018. So basically, the CV appropriation said, HUD, make sure that all of your grantees are following the Stafford Act, and that means make sure there are no duplication of benefits. So that's how that requirement gets looped into the CV context. There are several resources available for for CV-related Federal Register notices, FAQs, TA products. There's lots of information out there. There is a main CDBG-CV page on the HUD Exchange. We highly recommend that you visit that. You're going to find a lot of information. So for those of you, about a quarter of you, a third of you who are brand new to CDBG-CV and all the things related to it, you really want to make sure you check out that HUD Exchange page. You're going to find there a lot of information, including the DOB quick guide. So there's a quick guide on duplication of benefits that nicely lays out exactly what duplication of benefits means, where it comes from, and gives you some examples of how to apply it in context. And then there's also the overall notice that you want to review as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stan so that he can talk a little bit more.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. So duplication of benefits started with the CDBG Disaster Recovery Program. And it was there because during a disaster, many people had insurance. They may have been eligible for FEMA assistance. They may have gotten some money from volunteer organizations that assist in disasters. And so as a result, in CDBG Disaster Recovery, the rules want you to have those folks get access all their other sources available before you come in with CDBG-DR. They want to make sure you've done insurance and the applicant has applied for FEMA and anything else. That does not apply to CDBG-CV. So that's extremely important distinction. So there is no statutory order of assistance in CV. You don't have to make somebody prove that they applied to 4 different philanthropic organizations and tried everything else before you provide them with rental assistance. Okay, all right. I think we're going to jump right into another poll. On the next slide. There it is. Jennifer, can you advance? All right. So if we can get the poll up. So true or false, CDBG-CV does not require an order of assistance. In other words, you do not have to access all of their available assistance prior to receiving CDBG-CV funds. So true or false? I'll let people jump in. All right, Mark, you want to go ahead and share the answers? I think we're slowing down on the responses. All right, so with CDBG, you do not have to, CDBG-CV rather, does not require an order of assistance. So you can provide assistance to someone even though there might be another source that could have helped. It is only in DR where you have to make them access all the other available sources before you come in with an unmet need, not CV. So when we talk about don't totally rely on the DR Federal Register notice, it's because of that distinction. So you have to prove that you have to make sure someone doesn't have a duplication of benefits. We're talking about how coming up next, but you don't have to make them go find other sources before you help them. That's only a DR thing. Okay. Okay, Jennifer, you're going to grab it back. All right. Okay, so because it's federal funds with CDBG-CV, we need to follow the cost principles in 2 CFR Part 200. So it requires grantees to expend funds on things that are necessary and reasonable. And here are the citations for the CDBG activities, which is one way that we're going to determine whether it's necessary or whether it's allocable. So entitlement programs are, of course, the 24 CFR Part 570. The state one is 570.489. And there's the home citation, ESG, and continuum of care that all require us to use 2 CFR Part 200. Okay, next. All right. So let's just quickly talk about the how 2 CFR Part 200 tells us we have to, what affects allowability, okay? So costs must basically be necessary and reasonable for the performance of the award and be allocable, which is one of those hard words to say, but what it means is, in reality, it means it's an eligible activity for the program you're funding it with. So reasonable. Reasonable is you don't overpay. You pay what a prudent person would pay for the same thing. So if you're buying drywall and it's $500, or however they sell drywall by, and you pay $4,000, it's questionable that that was reasonable cost. So is it something a prudent person under the same circumstances would buy? Allocable, again, hard to say, but it's allocable basically if it's eligible for that program. So for CDBG-CV, for instance, buying construction equipment is generally ineligible. So it wouldn't be, if you bought construction equipment with CDBG-CV funds, it wouldn't be allocable because it's not an eligible use. All right. Next. Okay, so what? I think we're on slide 19.
Sorry, Stan. I'm going to get us back there.
Okay. We don't have much time.
Yes, I know. Getting there. Okay, this one,
Okay.
right?
Sure, we can go with that one. Okay,
What?
so, nope, one more. There we go. Okay, so necessary is the cost for an eligible activity. Does it meet the program standards? And also, is there a need for the assistance? Does someone have a gap? Does someone not able to pay rent? Is someone not able, because of a lack of income due to COVID, not able to repair their home? Is it reasonable? Would a prudent person consider that to be something they would pay for, the same price? Are the costs in accordance with the relative benefits received? In other words, is it an eligible activity? Okay, next. All right, so let's look at rental assistance. If I can find it. Okay, so Jennifer, did you jump ahead again?
I don't think so.
Okay.
For rent.
All right, here we go. Okay, thank you. All right, so what are some cost principles? How do they guard against duplication of benefits? Well, one, of course, is the necessary part. You know, how are we gonna assess the amount needed for rent, utility costs, and deposits? So they're gonna give you a lease. They're gonna give you a utility bill. They're gonna give you a lease that has what the deposit is for moving in. That's how we're determining that it's necessary. What are resources available to pay the cost? So as we're talking about the DOB and as we go forward, what other sources in a community are available for the exact same purpose? For example, if you're in a city and your county has money from Treasury under the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, you may want to either coordinate with the county so that you will have access to who they helped, so you can check to make sure that they haven't helped someone before you write them a check for rent. Or you can design your program so that you're paying mortgage assistance or you're doing rehab as opposed to doing rental assistance, because there's another source in your community that has a lot of money to pay for rental assistance. You need to determine that if they received assistance from several sources, you need to have applications and policies in place where they list the other sources they've gotten assistance from, and that they sign something in their grant agreement or their beneficiary agreement that says, if you find out they had a duplication of benefits, they're going to repay you. It's called a subrogation agreement. And then, are the costs reasonable based on the type of assistance and the income of the beneficiary? And there's a note here, income's not a duplication of benefit. You don't have to make somebody spend all their money that they have, all their assets and all their income before you provide them with assistance. So assets, income, not a duplication of benefits. Okay. And then I think it's poll time again. So in order to meet all federal requirements, all CDBG-CV expenses must be necessary, reasonable, and allocable. True or false? Okay, I think we can go ahead and show the answers, Mark. Yeah, so most everyone got that. It is true. That's the whole crux of the biscuit for all these 2 CFR Part 200. Every expense for all federal grants must be necessary. So there has to be a need for it. They must be reasonable. So prudent person would pay in the similar circumstances. So you're not overpaying. And it's got to be for an eligible activity, something you can identify as an eligible activity under the grant program and charge it to that grant. So, all right, good job, everybody. And Jennifer, I think it's back to you.
All right. Let me get back to the slides. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to get into the basic duplication of benefits calculations. So walk you through some examples of how you would look at the need and what's already being provided to see whether there is any duplication. So let's hop to that. So for establishing a duplication of benefits strategy and guidelines, you should really come up with some familiar and basic steps for performing the analysis. And that's going to be built into your policies and procedures for DOB. These steps should provide you with a foundation for operating your programs. The basic steps, just to kind of give you the high level overview, is that you want to determine the applicant's total need. You then want to identify what total assistance is available to the applicant. You're then going to exclude any non-duplicative amounts from the DOB analysis, and then calculate the duplication of benefits, which is going to be the total assistance minus those non-duplicative amounts. And then you're going to apply any program caps, and then make sure you've firmly documented your analysis, and then reassess the unmet need as needed. And so let's kind of walk through a couple examples of how you would walk through those steps. So the first step is assessing the amount of need. So what is the total cost for the activity or the need that the applicant is coming to you to fulfill? So in this example, there's a rehabilitation of a long-term care facility, and the facility is coming to you with a request for $100,000 to renovate a floor in the building so that they can use it to isolate care for patients with COVID-19. So that's the need, and the need is $100,000. So the next thing is that you want to determine the amount of assistance that has or will be provided from all sources to pay for the cost. Remember, back on our slide of what is not DOB, you don't want to include assistance for other purposes. So we're going to take out assistance for any other purposes. So in this example, let's say that the long-term care facility was awarded a $50,000 grant from HHS, Skilled Nursing Relief Fund, to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. And they have $10,000 of that remaining after paying for other HHS eligible costs. So they've already spent $40,000 of that grant on other eligible costs under the HHS program. So all that they have left from that grant is $10,000. So it's important to remember that when you're evaluating a recipient's need, they may have multiple sources of assistance because a lot of these things are costly, and so they're looking to fund the cost as best they can from whatever sources they can get. But not all sources may be used for the same cost. So you really want to look at the sources and what it's being applied to. So how they're going to apply those sources to their costs is a really important part of this analysis. Okay, so step 3, then we're going to do some math. And the cost of the activity, remember we said is $100,000. They still have $10,000 from the HHS grant, and this is an eligible use under the HHS grant. So we're going to subtract that $10,000 from the cost of the rehabilitation. So the maximum award that they could receive is $90,000. That's your unmet need. And so this is the amount that could be paid for with CARES Act funds without having a duplication of benefits. All right, and in this step 4, you're going to document steps 1 to 3. This is a very, very important part of this process because if you don't document it, then it's as good as not happening. You want to make sure that you have the information in your files that shows that you walked through this process. If someone comes to monitor and you can't show that you have documentation that shows that you did this, then you can't really prove that it happened. So you have to document the cost charged to the federal award. You want to take a close look at the cost principles that Stan just reviewed. And you also want to be familiar with the CDBG-CV record keeping requirements and make sure that you have everything on file that you need. This helps keep you in compliance and make sure that you are not just complying with CV requirements, but also the cost principle requirements, which are an overarching requirement. Okay, so here's another example. We're going to do one more example just to sort of walk through the steps another time. So a family seeks emergency rental assistance under the ESG funded homelessness prevention program and provides assistance for up to 6 months. So our steps again, we're going to assess the need, determine other sources that have been or will be used to pay for all or part of the cost. We're then going to calculate the maximum award. We're going to do that math calculation, and then we're going to make sure that we're documenting the analysis for compliance. So assessing the need. So they're coming to us for rental assistance. Their monthly rent is $800. Monthly utilities in the rental housing, we're going to estimate at $200 a month, but just know that you would use a real number if you were doing this in real life. So the total need for this applicant is $1,000 a month for 6 months. That's what they're asking. So now we're going to determine the assistance from other sources for the same costs. So in this scenario, the applicant, you're going to ask the applicant whether they're receiving any assistance from another source. And this should be in your application. So you make sure that your application materials are collecting the types of information you need to perform your duplication of benefits analysis up front. That's going to save you a lot of time. So your application is going to ask whether the family is receiving assistance from another source. The family reports that its church has pledged to pay utility bills in arrears for the next 3 months. So the family certifies that it has not applied for other assistance other than that assistance. Then the duplicative amount from other sources is going to be that utility payments for 3 months, which is $600. It's important to note here that sometimes private sources do provide recipients with assistance. And so you want to have an agreement in place that if a recipient were to receive funds from another source after they've received funds from you for the same purpose, that you're going to be able to recapture the funds that you gave them. And this is commonly referred to as a subrogation agreement. And Stan's going to talk about subrogation agreements in a little bit. And so you're really going to do the calculation. So for months 1 to 3, their rent and utilities are $1,000, but they're going to be getting a $200 a month assistance payment from the church. So really their need for those months 1 to 3 is only $800. For months 4 to 6, however, they're no longer receiving that payment from the church, so that's the full $1,000. So that's going to be the amount that you're able to provide to this applicant. Months 1 through 6, months 1 through 3, $800, months 4 through 6, $1,000. And then finally, you're going to document the steps that you took, all of your backup documentation, that all of the information that Stan just went over about your lease, utility bills, something from the church that shows that that's when that the assistance was only provided for months 1 to 3, all that information. All right. And so then I'm going to turn it over to Stan.
All right, so I'm going to hit one of the questions beforehand, and then the other question I think we're going to cover during the presentation. So we had a question about if a project designated leveraged funding for a CV project and then determined after bidding the leverage funding is not needed for a project, can the leverage funding be directed to another project to remove duplication of benefits? Probably not. And not because of duplication of benefits, because of the necessary part of 2 CFR Part 200. So if you have someone who has a project and they say it's going to cost me $100,000, we have $20,000. You say, fine, we'll give you $80,000 of CV money for this. And then the bids come in at 80, they still have $20,000 they said they were going to allocate to that project. So that it's not necessary for you to pay $80,000 now. They still need to pay the 20 they had, and you now need to pay the difference, which is $60,000, because that's the necessary amount to do the deal. Okay. Next. All right, so CDBG-CV policies and procedures, getting started. So we haven't said it enough, but DOB, duplication of benefits, applies to CDBG-CV allocations, as well as if you're using 19 or 2020 formula allocations for the, prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. There is no difference in duplication of benefits for states and entitlements. You can reassess the need at a later point in time, such as if there's a change order, if you're doing rehab, you can reassess that yes, now they need more money. They don't have there's a bigger gap than we thought. If you have the same process of reviewing for all applications, you have a better chance of catching duplication of benefits. And here's something that's kind of getting to the question about the leveraging. DOB analysis is at the level of the activity or the beneficiary and not at the program level. So you wouldn't be able to say, hey, we know that there's no one else doing owner-occupied rehab in our county, therefore we're not going to check with DOB. You can't do that at the program level. It's got to be at the grantee or the subrecipient level. So another question we had was someone funding a child care service for a low mod population run by a YWCA who also gets donations for the same purpose. So is that a duplication of benefits? Well, it could be. It's at, remember, we have to look at it at the grantee or subrecipient level. So let's just, again, so I can do math in front of a couple hundred people, if they're asking us for $100,000 for salaries, and then they expect to raise $30,000, we would be able to give them $70,000 for the gap. If they raised more than that, and say they raised 40,000, so now they only need 60 as the gap, we would adjust, as we said, reassess the need at a later point. They're showing us they raised more money. They don't need the full amount, they need less. So yeah, it could be a duplication of benefits. It could be a necessary and reasonable issue as well. And remember, the reason I'm saying that is because in the question they said the YWCA raises money for the same purpose. So they're fundraising for the child care program and we're funding the child care program. So yes, absolutely could be a duplication of benefits. And then duplication of benefits, if you have a subrecipient that's doing the program, they got to follow the DOB requirements as well. Okay. Next. Okay. Yeah, as we just said, so CDB, here's an example. We're paying for Meals on Wheels. It's similar to our child care. We're paying for the salary of a social service provider. The program also receives funding from HHS, Meals for Older Adults program. So we need a detailed budget that shows a line item budget of what the salary and fringes are for who we're paying for and what Meals on Wheels, Meals for Older Adults program is paying for. Of that, we would pay the gap. Okay. Okay, so, excuse me, grantees must make reasonable assumptions about risk and necessary documentation. So let's go back to our example of ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program funded by Treasury. The ERA program is being used by a lot of localities instead of CDBG for rental assistance because it's a little bit simpler to implement, right? One, there's a lot more money. Second of all, there is you're not limited to 6 months in a row, and you don't have to worry about the lead-based paint requirement. So as a result, if there's a ERA program in your county and you are also running a rental assistance program, your risk is going to be pretty high that you could duplicate benefits, right? 2 programs paying for the exact same thing. So that would be a high risk. If you are the only agency that's funding owner-occupied rehab in your county or your city, then you probably have a lower risk of duplication of benefits because there's not another program providing the exact same assistance. All right, next. Okay, so we've got to have policies and procedures that incorporate, at the very least, a subrogation agreement saying that the applicant is going to repay the funds if it's determined that they are duplicative. Method of assessing the likelihood of a DOB by evaluating the need and the resources available. So we're just talking about if there are other programs doing the exact same, paying for the exact same thing, we need to work with them on some type of information sharing, or we need to design our CDBG-CV funds so that it doesn't pay for the exact same thing the other program is paying for. Okay. So again, look into what the other programs are in your community are. Home TBRA, ESG, ESG-CV, whether or not there's regular CDBG funds that are being administered in another department or division than the CDBG-CV funds for some reason. Some states have done that where they've moved the CV funds for rental assistance to a human services organization and having CDBG folks do the other stuff. So what other federal funds are used for the same activity? And then reasonable effort to determine what other sources might be. So data sharing agreements with, especially if you're a COC providing a rental assistance and you have HMIS, which is already tracking who gets assistance. If the rental assistance programs are run through one of those agencies, you might use HMIS to determine whether or not there's been a duplication of benefits. Look at other programs within your agency. And of course, on our application, we need to ask applicants, what other funds have you received? Okay, next. So steps to take if a potential duplication of benefit is identified. Reevaluate the need and document the remaining DOB. So if in our leverage question we had where someone was, bids came in 20,000 below what the estimate was, then you would reevaluate the need and say, okay, we were going to give you 80,000 because you were putting 20,000 up and we thought it was going to cost 100. Now it's only costing 80. You need to put your 20,000 up and we're only going to provide you 60 so as not to give you more money than you need. If there's a DOB, you find duplication of benefits, you're going to request repayment and your repayment amounts are treated like return of grant funds. And we're always responsible for following all the rules that HUD tells us we have to. So if we find that if there's evidence there was a duplication of benefits and we don't work to get that money repaid, then the non-compliance is subject to program remedies, which means HUD may ask you to pay the money back. Okay, next. All right, so some best practices. So on our application, we need to ask folks what other sources they've had available that they've received to pay for the exact same costs. We're going to want to verify likely sources of assistance that may be available for the same cost. They're going to want to, if they tell us that they received money from an ERA program, we're going to try and verify if the ERA program they actually received it. Include an agreement in there to repay the duplication of benefits as a condition of assistance. That's what often referred to as a subrogation agreement. If you get money for the same purpose, you're going to pay us back. The risk-based DOB policies and procedures, what we were just talking about. Is there others, main one, what other sources are there that pay for the exact same use, exact same activity? And how are we going to make sure that we check with each other to make sure we're not duplicating the assistance and giving someone more than they need? And then we'll need policies on how we're going to recover duplicative assistance when a DOB is identified so that we can avoid non-compliance. I will add, since I'm wrapping up here, I will add that DOB has its start in DR, in the Disaster Recovery Program, and in the Disaster Recovery Program, like we said, insurance, FEMA, Red Cross, other volunteer organizations are all in there. And the idea is that we want to make sure that we're not paying for things that insurance already paid for. With CV, we're making sure more likely it's other programs. So we're working with other programs and other providers to make sure that we're not paying for for the same thing twice. All right, I think a poll is coming up next. All right, in order to prevent DOB, grantees should include questions in the application for assistance or intake form to assess whether other sources are available or have been used to pay for the same cost. Ask to verify likely sources of assistance that might be available. Include an agreement to repay. Develop risk-based DOB policies and procedures. None of the above or all of the above. So, Mark, I'll let you take it away. And Jennifer, I'm afraid I only left you 10 minutes.
That's okay. I can go through these last slides pretty quickly, so hopefully leave a few minutes at the end to grab a couple of those questions. We do have several questions rolling in. Again, if we aren't able to get to your question today, please do go to the HUD Exchange and submit and ask a question. Yeah, you can go ahead and show the answers, Mark. Okay, so it's looking like, is that okay? Most folks are saying all of the above.
All right.
Good job. Yes,
The
all of
correct
the
answer is all of the above. Yep.
Yep.
All right.
So yeah, so all of these things are things you want to do to prevent duplication of benefits. All right. So we're going to move on now to talk about some special considerations of loans and duplication of benefits. Oops. Okay, so FEMA published some guidance in February 2019 that said that loans are not a duplication of benefits for years covered by the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018 if the DRRA conditions are met. And the years covered by the DRRA are 2016 to 2021 disasters. Now, coronavirus is a disaster. Established as of January 2020, so it does fall within that time frame. This exception for loans not being duplication of benefits during these years sunsets on October 5th, 2023. So it's only going to cover assistance that is provided until 2023. And basically what it says is a loan is not a prohibited duplication of benefits, provided that all federal assistance is used towards a loss suffered as a result of a major disaster. There is a fact sheet on this. It's hyperlinked there on the slide. So go ahead and take a look at that fact sheet for more information on this topic. So we'll talk about other kinds of loans. Private loans. Private loans are never a duplication of benefit. A loan that's not provided by a guaranteed by a governmental entity, and that requires this should say CDBG-CV grantee to repay the full amount. That is not going to be a duplication of benefit. Subsidized loans. Now they might be a duplication of benefit. It's going to depend. You want to look at, your subsidized loans, including forgivable loans, are, we're not talking about private loans here. We're talking about loans that are subsidized by another entity. So you're going to need to look at those closely, pay attention to that waiver that we just talked about, and then, do that assessment. So for declined loans are never a duplication of benefit. Declined loans are loan amounts that were approved or offered by a lender in response to a loan application, but were turned down by the applicant. So this means that there were never any loan documents signed. So there wasn't actually a loan. So just because they were offered funds and then decided to not take that loan, that is not a duplication of benefit. Canceled loans are also not a duplication of benefit. The borrower has entered a loan agreement in this situation, but for some reason, all or a portion of the loan funds were not dispersed. And those funds, those undispersed funds, are no longer available to the applicant. So that portion of the canceled loan, also not a duplication of benefit. So short-term loans that must be repaid may not be a duplication of benefit. This is only true if that DRRA sunset applies that I just talked about in 2023. The Stafford Act allows federal funds to be used for short-term coverage when primary sources will be available later. subject to repayment agreements. So basically, for example, to speed assistance before CDBG-CV funds are available, state and local sources can provide short-term assistance through a subsidized loan without causing a duplication of benefits. So, but to do this, you want to make sure you draft your loan documents to make sure that the term of the assistance is short. So in other words, repaid within 1 year or whenever long-term financing is available. The recitals of that loan agreement can indicate that assistance is provided only for the short term until other sources are available. And if that loan is forgivable, you must have loan terms that are enforceable if the conditions of the loan are not met. So in short, you want to make it a true loan and not just a grant disguised as a loan. So also pay attention to eligibility for reimbursement. You know, payment of debt is not a reimbursable for CDBG because it's not an eligible activity. So you want to make sure that you're, in all of this, you're paying attention to the other CDBG requirements as well, including, you know, reimbursement and underwriting if it's economic development and that kind of thing. So I'm going to skip these last couple of examples here because we're getting dangerously close to our our wrap-up time. So Stan, do you want to kind of just wrap us up here with some resources?
Sure, if you'll hit the one more. So here we have just the CPD COVID-19 grantee guidance and federal funding priority order for non-congregate shelter. And then next, so we had one question, a consistent theme among the questions. I think we can take a minute, Jennifer, to jump in on, and Robert, jump in if you'd like. And that is that if another community, so another county, the state government is using funding emergency rental assistance with Treasury money, and we also have an emergency rental assistance program, how do we determine whether there's duplication of benefits? Really, the reality of it is, one, you need a data sharing with them so that you can see that you are not helping the same people. Sometimes that's easier said than done because, one, sometimes the county or the state isn't interested in a data sharing. Their IT people may say it's too risky, there's too much risk of security, we don't know what the city's security is, so therefore we're not going to let them share. The other reality, and that's the main reality of it, is they're not willing to share. So if that's the case, then you need to consider, as we're talking about policies and procedures and strategizing on how to use this money, that maybe rental assistance need is being met by that other program, and therefore you should spend your CV money on something else. So remember, one of our best practices was avoid programs where there's overlap with another program operating in your community. So if they're meeting the need, maybe CV could be used for something else other than rental assistance. All right. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add to that because we are 2 minutes away from being out of time. Jennifer, anything else? No?
No,
okay.
Nothing to add to that.
Okay. All right. Okay, I think we're out of time. If we didn't get to your question, I apologize, but there is the Ask a Question desk that we can all, you can absolutely submit your questions to. Thank you very much for attending. We appreciate it, especially those of you on the West Coast that got up way earlier than I'm sure you used to. And then we are going to finish up here, and the next session starts at 10. You have a minute left, and 1 minute extra. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.